Hello, listeners. If you are curious about technical communications, then this podcast is for you. On each episode, I will interview a guest who will share their unique journey. This is Inside Tech Comm with Zahra Matabana. Let's get started. I'm honored to welcome today's guest, Timothy Ponce. Hi, Timothy.
Hey, how are you doing? I'm doing great.
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thank you for asking. It's good to have you on my show. I'm so excited to be talking to you because you bring such an interesting perspective to technical communications.
Yeah, and it's really great to be here, to be a part of a podcast that really is looking at, how do you move into technical communication? Because the more I've been involved with technical communication, the more I realize that I am not an aberration in the sense that I wasn't just woke up one day and just knew that was what my career was going to be, but that everyone has their own sort of unique path as they make their way into this field. So I'm so excited that you're doing a podcast.
Yes, and I think you will bring a great perspective and a rich dimension to this conversation. And you had a very interesting path to technical communication. So I'm excited to know more about it. So tell us a little about yourself first.
Well, like you said, my name is Dr. Timothy Ponce. My job title is Senior Lecturer and Coordinator of Internships in the Department of English at the University of Texas Arlington. And so my actual content area of my Ph.D. is 16th and 17th century British literature with a secondary focus in writing program administration and technical and professional writing. And so my actual faculty line at the university is to teach technical writing and professional design. And so I also have a small little technical writing firm on the side. Kind of in the summer, I'm 9-month contract. So like most teachers, we're always looking for a summer side hustle to supplement our pay. And so it's called Cornerstone Editing. And so I've done a lot of typesetting, copy editing, and things like that. I've done a couple coffee table books, a couple long form books, some magazine work as well.
Wow. That is quite the introduction. But again, when we started this, we said this is going to be a rich conversation because you are not just an academic, but you're also a practitioner on the side or over the summer. So this brings such a fascinating perspective to our discussion because you're going to be talking about what you're teaching the next generation while you're also practicing this at a very interesting intersection.
And I think it actually makes me, in some ways, it increases my students' confidence in me and in the course itself, because I can talk to them not just about the theory that a lot of times you'll get in a university setting, because I can speak to that, but more of, okay, when I was working on this book and I had this client, these are the issues we ran into, and the sort of careful client, technical communicator relationship, the sort of real tangible examples, and then even hold up this book and say, here's the final product that finally made it, to the end.
Right. Like real life examples that are firsthand that you experienced, which is fantastic. So in your introduction, your title and your major and what you're doing, it was a lot for me to process. So I want you to break it down and tell us a little bit about each, because I think it is important for our listeners to know what you've graduated in and what you're doing and how they intersect or how they diverge. I want to know more about that, please.
Absolutely. So my baccalaureate degree, my undergraduate degree is in English, and it's from Sam Houston State University. But with that training, I moved into the corporate world. And so I worked for Starbucks Coffee Company for a while. I managed a store. I did, obviously, within a store manager position, there's a lot of profit and loss reporting and a lot of sort of market analysis reporting and writing. And I also did some corporate education for them. And so I enjoyed doing that. And I realized that I didn't realize at the time, but I was doing a lot of technical writing simply in that position. Mm-hmm. So I tell myself, no matter what job you have, you're a part-time technical communicator, no matter where you end up.
I like how you put that. Yes, I would agree.
It's true. I mean, because usually when I teach introduction to technical writing, that's one of the first conversations I have where I say, okay, let's say you're a lab tech, or let's say you're an engineer, or let's say you're a teacher, or let's say, and I always show them how everyone is doing some sort of technical communication. Maybe we can talk more about that in a second. So I left Starbucks Coffee Company. I loved the company, but I was having to travel quite a bit, and I just needed a better work-life balance. I take care of my disabled mother, and so I moved over to Bank of America Merrill Lynch, and I did teller operations and compliance, and a lot of teller training and a lot of report writing, a lot of email writing, again, being a part-time technical communicator in that teller operations role. But I realized that I was always doing some sort of training or corporate educational role everywhere I ended up. So I decided I should probably just go do that for a living because that's what I really like. Mm-hmm. And so I went back to Sam Houston and I took a master's degree in English, and I taught at Sam Houston for 3 years, and I enjoyed that. And I taught developmental writing, I taught freshman composition, and then I ended up moving to Denton, Texas, and I started a doctoral program at University of North Texas. And I just continued on with my area of focus, which had been literature, right? English studies, specifically British literature of like Shakespeare and his contemporaries had been my focus. So when you start a doctorate, it's usually not best to jump into a completely different content area, because then all of the research that you've done leading up to that would be kind of not usable in the dissertation or leading up to the dissertation. So I just continued to do that. But as I was taking coursework in that content area, at University of North Texas, there is a completely independent technical communication department. So they're one of the very few that are completely separated in their own department. And I became friends with some of the faculty over there, and they encouraged me to take a course or two. They had a certificate in teaching technical communication at the graduate level, and I just knew that was something I enjoyed, was that sort of writing, professional writing, and I knew it would increase my marketability as an academic. And I knew that I didn't want to be in a research-intensive position at a university. I wanted to be in a teaching-intensive position. So I thought this is a great way to diversify my certifications and my degrees to make me more attractive to a larger range of universities. So when I started taking the course, it was so interesting to me because as I was sitting in these courses and being mentored by these different professors, I thought, my goodness, I should have done a Ph.D. in technical communication because I'm like, this is what I love. I was like, I mean, I enjoy Shakespeare and I teach Shakespearean classes every once in a while when there's a need for them. But I just kept thinking, this is what gets me excited about empathetically discovering and pairing with users to find out what their needs are to help them complete a task or make some sort of choice, right? And I'm just like, this is just that sort of puzzle and that discovery of that's associated with technical communication is just something I fell in love with. So, but I was already in dissertation writing phase when I had discovered that. So my wife would have killed me if I had said, I want to do a different doctorate. And so there was no way. I went ahead and finished it up, and then jumped onto the job market and just started doing technical communication on the side personally, because as I left North Texas, I ended up in an adjunct position, as most English people do. And so I just knew I needed to supplement my income. So opened up a small little business on the side and started doing some of that work. And again, just increasing my knowledge and sort of the praxis of it. And what I have found is that as I've taught and I've developed new courses at UTA at the University of Texas Arlington, is that being a practitioner has given me a very different perspective on how I teach my courses than some of the people I've come to who have never actually taken a role as a technical communicator or operated in that position and are teaching about it. Not to say that there's not value in what they're doing, but I really feel like some of the reason we've been so successful in the internship program at UTA and some of my students who've gone into the market and have joined up with STC and some of these other larger organizations is really because my end goal is always about delivering this usable document or communication experience. Because I mean, document may not be correct. I mean, we live in a digital world now, right? So website, mobile app, whatever it is.
Yes.
Right. So
it's content.
That's a little bit
We're talking about content here.
Yeah, content. Yeah.
Right. Content creation. Okay. Again, fascinating. I also come from an English literature background, but it's interesting to see how you've made your path into technical writing. And like many practitioners of technical communications, you've not had a straight path into technical communications, right? You've kind of, you've been entrepreneurial. You've hustled on the side. And kind of what struck me was that you find technical writing in every profession. I think I haven't heard that anywhere before. So that's a really cool perspective to have, that you do technical communications in every field. And you give examples of that.
Well, that's one of the reasons I'm a very big proponent of moving our introductory to technical writing class to the core curriculum, because I've made this case and some people have pushed very hard against it, but I'm starting to gain a lot of traction with other people alongside me who are also wonderful researchers in the fields like Dr. S.D. Beck and Dr. Amy Hodges at UTA, and just saying that this is really a vital skill set that we need to impart to students, because like I said, everyone ends up needing this knowledge and these tools. And it's not just about particular genres, because usually some of my colleagues who don't have any background in technical communication associate tech comm with particular genres, a report, a memo, an email. And they think, well, we could just teach those genre conventions and then they'll be prepared. But there's a whole different way of really thinking about the purpose of communication and the end results and the desired outcomes in the process to leading up to achieving those desired outcomes that are associated with the field of technical communication. So that's why I'm really a huge proponent of let's get this into the core curriculum to give students the option to pursue that.
And I like that idea, because one of the things that I have been thinking about is over the years, the field has grown, right? The demand for the field has grown. But I think my experience tells me is that the awareness about it hasn't. Do you see that disconnect?
Correct.
And I think bringing technical communications to the forefront of education, you're kind of trying to shed light on that we need to take a different look, a different perspective on that.
And I think you're really right. And so, for instance, I'm preparing all this coursework and this material content for the spring semester. And one of the things I'm trying to do in my courses is really connect some of my technical writing concepts to other rhetoric courses that my students have taken. And we just have a very rhetoric-heavy department at UTA. It's just the faculty we have. And so what I would tell them is, for instance, we have something like audience, something that's talked a lot about in rhetorical studies. Aristotle talks about audience. And then I say, but what I'm going to call that concept, and it's unique and distinct, is user, right? Or user, because audience implies almost this passive consumer of knowledge. Right?
Yes, I think that's a very important discussion. Yes, I think I was getting there in my head, and I'm glad we came to that same conclusion.
Yeah, and because I tell my students this, when you think about, I've done this in classes before, where I say, when I say the word audience, what do you think? And they say something like, well, like a movie theater, right? And so that's people sitting in the dark, watching one edited, prepared, produced, cannot be changed with, cannot be interacted. It's not necessarily desired to move someone to action, though it could. That's not its primary objective. I guess unless it was like a documentary or something. But even then, it's just, versus a user who it's live, it's being interacted with, it's being used to complete a task, make a decision, right? And that's a very different concept, which implies we need different tools, right, to accomplish what we need for our user.
I think that's a very important discovery as part of this conversation, where you are trying to distinguish between a user and an audience. I think over time, I have come to realize that we are not just doing audience analysis, but we're doing user analysis because of this very distinction. I just wasn't able to, I think, put it into a clear, tangible perspective for myself. Users you're engaging with, there is interaction. There's a user journey. It's not just an audience journey, but we don't talk about an audience journey. You talk about, because there is that live interaction. It's not a passive engagement, especially in these days when you, as you said, all the smart devices that we have. So you're constantly engaging with them and they want to participate in the feedback. They want to participate in the design and the evolution of the product.
Correct. And that is so absolutely needed. And that's usually when I talk about the discovery phase of kind of like our technical writing steps or technical communication steps. I always talk about that need to empathetically discover. And that means partnering with users. It's not like simply letting them sit on the sidelines or assuming what they need. And so there's this empathetic, almost this emotional connection that needs to happen as well, where we're trying to understand like their frustration with something or their maybe desire to complete this task. What is their motivation for completing the task? And there could be a very large emotional component to that. But it's just so funny to me that it's so difficult sometimes for people to see the difference between those two things. To me, it's like strikingly different. And even thinking difference between audiences typically is what I associate with entertainment versus users I associate with this like very calculated interaction.
Mm-hmm.
So I just got done teaching a technical design course, like an introduction to document design. And one of the things I kept telling them is I'm like, we don't add visual elements to entertain or make something people or make things beautiful. I hope it's beautiful. I hope you have a beautiful product at the end. I'm like, but our goal is to deliver usability. And all of these visual elements are not for entertainment, but to provide structure for the information or the idea that we're trying to convey, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if it doesn't reach that end, it's not doing its job.
Right.
So I'm like, are you peppering your document with pictures because you want to make it look pretty? Or is it actually enhancing our knowledge or our usability?
Okay, so that is a good, I think, pivot for me. You've talked about teaching Intro to Tech Comm to making it part of the core curriculum. So far, the students that have gone through this particular course, in your opinion, have they kind of come to understand what technical communications is and then decided to make that a career path for themselves? Can you share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So it's actually, I love teaching the introductory class because that's actually where most of my recruiting takes place for our minor, is in my classroom. Because it takes a while to unpack. Like you said, a lot of people don't understand what technical communication is. So I get to spend 4.5 months with the same set of people just unpacking what this idea is and how it applies. And what's so funny is I always walk away out of a class of 22 students because we meet in a computer lab. So I can only have so many students at one time. I always walk away with about 3 or 4 people picking up the minor or majoring in English, minoring in technical writing. And what's so funny is at UTA, the only degree that requires technical communication is nursing. And so my courses are about 80% nursing students, which
I've never heard that. I want to touch upon that in my follow-up question, but go ahead.
Okay. Because I've actually designed my technical communication course around medical writing. But anyway, I'll tell you more about that here in a second.
Okay.
So what's interesting is they love this idea of technical communication because a lot of them, especially my nurses, but even non-nurses, they end up being frustrated walking out of their 1301, 1302 courses because they're writing a lot of these long form essays, 10 plus pages. And as you and I know, as far as content and I would say as far as the way that our current society digests information and consumes it, that is way too long. No one is going to read your 10-page, 7,000 word, whatever. Or I just published an article 2 years ago. It was 10,000 words because that's what this academic journal wanted. I'm like, and I kept trying to add section breaks in it. And like, because I'm a technical writer, right? And it was on Shakespeare because I was just publishing part of my dissertation. And the journal kept kicking the section breaks back out. And they kept saying, well, if you're not doing enough work with your language, it's not written well enough. Like my topic sentences. And I'm like, I kind of agree with that, but you have a very different consumer than you did 30 years ago, right? They need that structure. And so a lot of my students too, they come out of these 1301, 1302 courses being taught to write these genres that really don't exist outside of academia. And when they come into technical writing and I'll give them their first assignment, they'll say, well, how long does this need to be? How many words? I say as few words as we need so that it conveys the point, yet no one gets injured or you get sued because you left something out. And they're just shocked by that. And they don't know what to do with it. It's so freeing. And, it's because it's so usable, right? And it's so accessible. And so I think as they kind of go through and see how practical this is going to be, and I talk about, if you don't chart it, it didn't happen. That's what I would tell my nurses, right? And so them talking about how do we write effective chart notes? How do we give patient instructions where we need to give instructions in a clear way because your patient might be in pain and be on medication at the same time. So if your instructions aren't clear to begin with, you already have 2 barriers that you have to go. We don't need bad instructions on top of the fact that we have these other barriers we're having to deal with. So as they kind of see this practicality and the technical communication reflects more of what they see in their own world and what they're seeing online and what they see in their magazines and what they're seeing on these blog posts, it's like the writing they live with. It's like the communication they live with. And so they become invested in it. And so I pick up all of these students who want to study it And one of the wonderful things too is that the way that the nursing degree is set up at UTA, and we have one of the best nursing degrees in the country, and a lot of students really try to get, it is cutthroat trying to get into that nursing program. But what ends up happening is they have a very small window for minors. It's like they can only take 3 additional classes outside of nursing. Mm-hmm. And so our minor actually works for them. It's one of the few ones that do, because Introduction to Technical Writing is already required in their other coursework. So then they take 2 advanced courses in an internship in technical writing, and they've completed their minor. And so I have a lot of nurses who love the content. It actually fits into their degree plan without them having to take extra hours, because if you take hours outside your degree plan, you can't get financial aid for that. And so I'm producing all of these nurses who are actually technical writers on the side. And I tell them, like, if you ever decide you can't do nursing anymore because of emotional burnout or whatever, I'm like, you have a solid fallback. Or some of them end up just saying, I did my clinical rounds. I cannot do this, but I'm too far in. And so they end up coming to me and say, how do I brand myself as a technical communicator? I'm like, let's do it. All right.
Wow. I think this was an interesting, dimension to our conversation. I didn't expect to discover this as to how I'm always looking for opportunities to share with our audience on how you can get into technical communications. But here's somebody who is planning to become a nurse, for example, right? And then they discover this, and they can probably straddle both, and they can maybe become a nurse, and then somewhere down the road, because they've had this training. I think I want to come back to this important point that technical writing, it is a skill set. It is not that anybody can do it. And I think that's a notion people carry, that I write and therefore I can be a technical writer. Yes, you can write, but it requires some training on your end. And I think making content accessible, making it usable, these are all the words that I just took. I was taking those notes as you were speaking about it, being an empathetic writer, trying to remove barriers that requires, and removing the verbosity of the content that you're creating.
Yes.
All that requires a retraining or relearning in your
Absolutely.
Approach to writing.
So one of the fun things I do is I have my nurses write an explanation or a summary of a case to an attending physician, and then write the exact same thing to an admit person at the hospital who has no medical training but works in a hospital, mm-hmm. and then write the same thing to their spouse of the person who suffered the injury, who has no medical training whatsoever and no background. And so the word choice changes, the level of empathy, right? All of that changes to making accessible for that particular user, right? And what are they using it for? Their spouse is concerned about, are they healthy? Are they okay? The attending physician needs to make decisions about what medications to order, what tests to order. And what's interesting too is that as I've talked to a lot of my nurses, I keep telling them, a lot of these pharmaceutical companies, a lot of labs are looking for technical communicators to bring on who understand enough of what their researchers are doing to mm-hmm. write white papers, to write grant applications, to do that. And so they need that background. They must have it, like you were saying, but they also need that training and that skill set.
Yes.
And so it's funny too, because my wife works for the Math Association of America, and they always have the hardest time finding anyone who has both a writing background, but then also some sort of science background. And she keeps saying, she's like, we're looking for someone to do X job, but we just can't find anyone that really fits this. Mm-hmm. And so I always tell my students, sometimes you think there are certain classical fits for majors, like English and history, or all these certain very particular combinations. But I always tell them, sometimes having an arts major and a sciences minor or something like that, or a sciences major and an arts minor, it really works out well for you in the sense that it equips you with these different skill sets,
right?
That then you can market how you want to.
I definitely see an advantage with that. And then it kind of also makes you a little more of a well-rounded person. You bring a good healthy balance.
Absolutely.
In my opinion, that is what I would be looking for. I think the operative word here is empathy. We need to develop that empathy for our user.
Absolutely.
And that comes when you are exposed to both sides, the science and the arts.
Absolutely. And what's funny is I'm looking at my engineers, for instance, And my engineers are so, when I bring up empathy to them, they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so, but what they do get, and they do understand, and again, this is understanding my user who's sitting right in front of me. I talk to them, I say, okay, let's just say you are competing for a position at an engineering firm with another student who just graduated from an equally accredited engineering degree. They minored in math. You minored in technical communication.
Mm-hmm.
In this economy where we're looking for what your add extra is, you already get lots of math in engineering courses. You had enough to pass your certification exam. The add extra of having technical communication, that skill set, that ability to do something extra and different, which is empathizing, understanding how to write those reports, because you might write a report for a city council about a project you're doing, which none of them are engineers. So you need to think about how you're going to do that correctly, and empathizing with someone who doesn't want to. They're an elected official, so you can't make them feel stupid, right? Because ultimately you're going to want them to cut your check at the end of the day. But at the same time, you need to be honest with them and show that you're a professional. And so they then understand that because they've had to pitch. They've had to do a lot of pitches in their courses. Mm-hmm. And so they're like, oh, this makes sense. This is about blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yes, absolutely. Versus when I have a clay major right now. So her major is in clay and sculpting, and she's a technical writing minor. And so she is now moving into her internship was actually in social media marketing for her technical writing minor. And I just met with her because she's finishing up this week. And she said, she goes, I really feel like my art classes prepared me to be a better technical writing marketer, because in the art classes, we focus on how to help people feel something or experience something in our art, in our medium. She goes, in technical writing, I'm just working with a different medium, right? And then through my social media marketing, I'm helping somebody feel something or experience it in that 3 seconds they flip through on Instagram or whatever it is.
Yes.
And I said, very true. I was like, you're very prepared. So it's funny to see all these intersections that end up happening.
Oh my God, I'm really loving this conversation, because my objective in inviting you to this show has been, you are working, or rather you're interacting with the next generation of communicators. I'm not just saying technical communicators, right? We are all communicating in our day-to-day lives. And how do we connect with our next generation of technical communicators? Because I'm invested in the field. I want my field to grow, and I see a lot of potential, and I want the next generation to discover that as well. But what you have revealed to me is that technical communications is happening in different fields. So that has been my discovery as part of this conversation. But at the same time, for anybody in the audience, well, my listeners who, again, when you listen, you interact, right? You're not.
Absolutely.
And hopefully what they will learn from this discussion is that you could be a clay sculptor, you could be a nursing professional, but technical communications could be your glue to another career in the future. Could
Correct.
Be a step, rather, not just the glue, but the step, if you so decide. And communication.
And the cool thing too is you don't have to hide that past career. That's the other thing some of my students think is they try to downplay some of their other
that's very important.
You can highlight that past experience, and it becomes this asset. So what I would encourage people, if they're listening and are thinking about making a jump or a career change, is don't think that your past job experience is a liability to you making some sort of change. It's actually the asset that can help fuel you into your specific type of technical communication that you can do that other people can't. So again, just be encouraged in that. If you're listening to this, be encouraged.
I want to say a big thank you to you, Timothy, for saying this out loud, because like most of my episodes, I have discovered that people, most of my guests have kind of transitioned into this field. And the way they've benefited is not by downplaying it, but by owning it.
Yeah.
And you make a very, very important point that you don't have to start off as a technical communicator, but whatever career you have been in, you can always transition into technical communications and own your past in
Absolutely.
A beautiful way. It definitely is a stepping stone. It brings value. You can always bridge the two. And technical communications actually is one of those interesting fields that allows you to do that empowers you, that enables you to take your past and connect it and beautifully grow in this new field altogether.
Absolutely. I think, and that's one of the reasons, again, that I love it so much, is that it's really for everybody. It's not just this niche well, it's niche in the sense that there are unique skill sets that you have, but it's not confined or isolated. It touches and connects all of these different fields together. And really, TechComm is for everyone. And so really getting my students to see that and enjoy it. I've had people who were choir directors who came back and they're doing the technical writing certificate at UTA. And they're saying, I really want to do a career change. I just don't want to teach middle school choir anymore. I get that. I taught high school for a while. I understand how hard that can be. And so them being able to take a 12-hour certificate, a four-course sequence, to then be able to get that credentialing, to get enough knowledge, to develop that portfolio, to jump into that first TechComm position, and then showing them really in the internship phase, which is that last step of the certificate, how do we then own, like we were saying, own our previous work experience and demonstrate how it enriches us as a job candidate.
Well said. And I think very, very important points that our listeners can take away from this discussion is you can be coming from any field. I mean, the fact that you mentioned choir directors, I happen to know a good colleague of mine. She was a band teacher and she has done fantastically well as a technical writer. So this discussion has been an amazing discovery to me, because I'm like, wow, I came into this conversation thinking that, okay, I'm going to ask you some typical questions, but I did not, this was anything but typical for me. I wanted you to bring your perspective to this discussion, because every bit that you have shared with me has been an eye-opener, more eye-opening than I have been lucky to see. And I've been in this profession for some time. Kind of moving forward, one of the questions that I wanted to ask was, what advice would you have for a young technical communicator or a career changer? And I think as part of our discussion, we've already addressed that. So that was going to be one of my typical questions, just so you know. I think we've covered a good amount of content, and I think there's so much. I'm thinking about what am I going to put in my show notes, and I have a lot of ideas just as I'm kind of mulling over this. But is there anything else that you think you've left out and you would like to share?
What's so funny, and this is again like just a fun little personal anecdote from me, is that I really struggled to read and write growing up. And so I ended up repeating first grade. And part of it was that they diagnosed me with dyslexia or dysgraphia. And so I really struggle to read. And even now, it's difficult for me. I don't read quickly. I usually have to use some sort of adaptive assistance, like having my computer read content to me is much faster. But it's so funny because I loved stories and I loved communicating and I loved talking and I loved standing up in front of people and teaching. And I mean, crowd of 500, 10,000, doesn't matter. I don't feel, I'm like,
not
whatever.
Surprised.
And so that's cool. And so what's funny is a lot of the things that seemed like were standing in my way, like with dysgraphia and struggling to read, struggling to write, I would say that if there seems like there are things that are in the way, if you really want to pursue it, and a lot of times I think we tell ourselves we can't do something, but we're really our own worst enemy. And we get into our minds believing, well, I'm not going to be able to make this work, or I'm not going to be able to find a job if I study English with a focus in technical communication, because everyone hears, well, English majors don't get jobs, or you're dyslexic, so you should do something that's like not text-based. But what I tell you is just be encouraged that, I end up getting a Ph.D. in English, and sometimes I get embarrassed because there'll be typos or something like that in some of my emails I didn't catch, and I always think, oh my gosh, I'm such a fraud. I'm such a, I don't deserve to be here, and that sort of imposter syndrome. But what I would tell you is if you want to break into it, keep trying, keep going forward. Nothing will ever be perfect, and give yourself grace, but keep improving, keep taking that next step, keep finding ways to, like I said, when I discovered text to speech, years ago, I felt like the whole world opened up to me. And so I think that I would just tell people to be encouraged that there are things that seem to be in the way. They may not be as large, they may be more of a molehill than a mountain, but they feel like a mountain to you. And I empathize with that. But find people who can mentor you and help you climb that. And then when you look back, you're going to realize it wasn't as large of an obstacle as you say.
Thank you so much for sharing that, for being so vulnerable and kind of really trying to connect with anybody out there who's listening that you can make this happen. And I think I want to reiterate what you said, to give yourself grace, to challenge yourself at the same time, and to find a mentor. I think that is something I learned very late in life. And again, I can either regret and live with that regret, or be thankful that I found a mentor as part of my journey. And I think it's very, very important to find that mentor who can lift you and guide you. And that mountain that you see may just be a molehill. So leaning in and leaning on others is perfectly okay. And you should do that. There is nothing wrong in it.
Absolutely. And I think we have to, in some ways, you have to learn to lean in on others, because it's funny, is I was talking to one of my people who were ready to graduate,
right.
And he was working with the local STC chapter as being mentored. And I said, one of the things that's really strong about you is that you understand what you don't know, and you're willing to lean in and ask and find help.
Well said.
And I was like, because there's no way you can know everything.
Absolutely.
There's just no way. There's someone else who's going to have this specialty over here, and someone will have this experience over here.
Right.
And it's knowing how to find those resources that really is, and leaning on them. And because they're going to end up leaning on you because you know something they don't.
Exactly. Absolutely. No doubt about that. So you build your community. And to do that, you have to connect with your tribe. And that is, I think, in everything that you've said, you have to reach out to your community. And if you don't, it is your loss, all said and done. So what you're trying to say is, why live with that loss when there is a support community out there ready to tap into? So don't hesitate to reach out. Oh my God, this has been one of the most fascinating conversations. And I really mean it, because I have learned so much about what happens in academia. I'm a practitioner, and I don't know how the academics are thinking or what is going on there. So this is my bridge to understand the academics a little better. And hopefully on my part, it's a community that I don't know about. So I'm going to lean in more to my academics, because you bring such a fascinating perspective on how we can grow our technical communications. And there is a little bit of technical communications in every field out there. So these are some great learnings that I have had personally from this conversation. Tim, thank you for your time. And I have thoroughly enjoyed having this conversation with you. One last question before we go. Are there any resources that you would like to recommend? Any books, any blogs that have inspired you that you would like to recommend?
Yeah, so I definitely would say that I would recommend finding out where your local STC, Society for Technical Communication chapter is, and getting involved. Because a lot of people I've talked to in the past, when they hear STC, they think of STC National. And so kind of this sort of large parent organization. But there are small groups of technical communicators in your area who are getting together, who are banding together to share knowledge, share resources, share skill sets. And they're, like you said, developing that community to where you know where to reach out when you don't know how to complete a task, or you just need some help or some direction.
Right.
So that'd be the first thing I would say, is get involved in that community.
Absolutely.
The second thing I would say is, if you have the opportunity, really look into doing just a little bit of coursework or prep in technical communication, because while everyone is a part-time technical communicator, to do it well, you do need a little bit of training, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's some people do it well and some people don't. Everyone's doing it, but it doesn't mean you're doing it well. And so what I would say is look into Society for Technical Communication training that's out there, or there's some pretty good LinkedIn learning courses. They're not tons on this, and I've even thought about actually creating my own LinkedIn learning courses to post.
Fascinating.
To that. I know it's a dream right now. Or reach out to some of your local universities and see if they do offer a post-baccalaureate certificate program where it's not tons of hours, you're not doing a whole nother degree. But what I would tell you is, I would really look to see if it is an actual certificate versus a continuing ed course.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times continuing ed, they're very short, it's very narrow, you're not getting a lot of full, really rich content because they're filling a very different role.
Mm-hmm.
But look in the actual departments within the university and see, some of them do just master's level. Some people do post-bac where it's an undergraduate level. We do it, actually, it's a post-bac, but we actually allow people also who don't have a bachelor's degree to take that certificate as well. So it's one of those things where if you can get that coursework, and it's going to be different every school, but see if you can nab one of those, and that will help you develop that portfolio as you kind of
good nuggets. Very, very, very important. As you said, everybody can do technical writing, but can you do it well? And I think that is going to be your differentiator. If you think we are good to go, on that note, I would like to say thank you one more time. And this has been a great conversation.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please share on your social media to help me reach a wider audience. Subscribe to the podcast on your favorite app, including Apple, Google, or Spotify. Follow us on Twitter at InsideTechComm or visit us at www.insidetechcomm.show for the latest updates. Catch you on another episode.